The cart just clipped the soup display, and 3 cans are rolling across the floor. Her phone is buzzing for the 4th time in 2 minutes from a number she doesn't recognize. The milk she grabbed is the wrong percentage, and she doesn't have energy to go back. The only register that's open has a line that wraps past the frozen food section. Her purse strap is cutting into her shoulder. She has $41 and some change to last the next 9 days. And somewhere in this store, her 5-year-old daughter has completely vanished. This is not a movie. This is a Tuesday afternoon in a regular grocery store in a regular American town. And the woman living it hasn't slept more than 4 hours in 3 nights. She spins around once, twice, checks the end of the cereal aisle, checks by the bread, checks near the pharmacy counter. Nothing. Her heart is doing that thing it does now. That thing it started doing 7 months ago. That thing where it drops 3 floors without warning. She calls her daughter's name. Once, twice, louder the 2nd time. A few people look up. She doesn't care. And then she sees her. All the way at the other end of the store, in the canned goods aisle, her tiny daughter is standing next to a man so tall he barely seems real. And her daughter is looking up at him, the way she used to look up at her father, like he hung the moon, like he was the safest thing on earth. And the man is reaching up to the very top shelf, pulling down a can of peaches, and handing it to her daughter like it's the most natural thing in the world. Before we go any further, if this kind of story moves you, if you believe that sometimes the most powerful moments happen in the most ordinary places, please take 2 seconds right now and subscribe to this channel. Hit the bell. Share this with someone who needs to feel something real today. Drop a comment below and tell me if you've ever had a stranger show up at exactly the right moment in your life. Because this story is about exactly that. Now let's go back. The mother walks fast, not running, but close. She is embarrassed before she even gets there. She knows her daughter. She knows that whatever just happened was completely unprovoked and fully intentional. Her daughter does not do things by accident. She never has. Even at 5 years old, she moves through the world like she knows exactly what she's looking for. The man turns when he hears footsteps. He's dressed simply. Dark pants, a gray button-down, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would tell you anything about him. He's somewhere in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that looks like it used to smile more than it does now. There are lines around his eyes that didn't come from laughing. His hair is touched with gray at the temples. He holds himself like someone who is used to large rooms and quiet spaces and people who wait for him to speak first. But right now he is crouched down slightly, talking to a 5-year-old girl like she is the most important person in the building. The mother reaches them and immediately starts apologizing. She is sorry. She is so sorry. Her daughter knows better than to bother strangers. She doesn't know what she was thinking. She is so sorry. The words come out in a rush the way words do when you are mortified and tired and doing 17 things at once. The man holds up one hand, gentle, not dismissive, just quiet, like he's saying without words, "Please stop apologizing. There is nothing to apologize for." He says it's completely fine. He says she wasn't bothering him at all. He says it like he means it. The mother reaches down and takes her daughter's hand. She gives her the look every mother has. The look that means we will talk about this in the car. The daughter doesn't flinch. She is still looking up at the man, studying him, the way children do when they've decided something, and they're just gathering the last bit of evidence. And then she says it. She says quietly, without any drama, without any awareness of what those words are about to do to everyone standing in that aisle, "You're the same height as my daddy was." Past tense. The mother stops breathing. Not for a second. For longer than a second. The kind of stop that happens when grief ambushes you in a place you weren't expecting it. In a grocery store on a Tuesday, standing next to a stranger in the canned goods aisle. She has gotten very good at controlling her face in public. She has had 7 months of practice. But this catches her off guard in the worst possible way, and for just a moment, just a flash, everything she's been holding together comes very close to the surface. The man looks at the little girl, and something changes in his expression. Not pity, not that uncomfortable look people get when they realize they've accidentally walked into someone else's grief. Something different, something quieter, like a door inside him opened just a crack. He looks at the little girl for a long moment, and then he very slowly crouches down to her level, and he says, "He sounds like he was a pretty tall guy." She nods very seriously. She says he was the tallest. She says he could reach anything. The man nods like this is very important information, like he is filing it away carefully. He says, "Well then, if there's ever anything else up high you need, I hope you find someone tall enough to help." He stands. He looks at the mother, just briefly. He doesn't say he's sorry for her loss. He doesn't say anything. He just nods once with his eyes, and then he turns and walks the end of the aisle and disappears around the corner. The mother stands there holding her daughter's hand and a can of peaches and all $41 of her budget and 7 months of grief, and she does not cry. She will not cry in this store. She has a rule about that. But she presses her lips together and she looks down at her daughter and she says, "Why peaches of all things?" And her daughter says, "Because Daddy always said peaches were the best fruit, and we haven't had them in a long time." She was getting them for him. Even now, even still, her name is Diane. She is 38 years old and she looks, on a good day, like a woman who used to laugh more. But right now he is crouched down slightly, talking to a 5-year-old girl like she is the most important person in the building. The mother reaches them and immediately starts apologizing. She is sorry. She is so sorry. Her daughter knows better than to bother strangers. She doesn't know what she was thinking. She is so sorry. The words come out in a rush the way words do when you're mortified and tired and doing 17 things at once. The man holds up one hand, gentle, not dismissive, just quiet, like he's saying without words, "Please stop apologizing. There is nothing to apologize for." He says it's completely fine. He says she wasn't bothering him at all. He says it like he means it. The mother reaches down and takes her daughter's hand. She gives her the look every mother has. The look that means we will talk about this in the car. The daughter doesn't flinch. She is still looking up at the man, studying him, the way children do when they've decided something, and they're just gathering the last bit of evidence. And then she says it. She says, quietly, without any drama, without any awareness of what those words are about to do to everyone standing in that aisle, "You're the same height as my daddy was." Past tense. The mother stops breathing. Not for a second. For longer than a second. The kind of stop that happens when grief ambushes you in a place you weren't expecting it. In a grocery store on a Tuesday, standing next to a strange in the canned goods aisle. She has gotten very good at controlling her face in public. She has had 7 months of practice. But this catches her off guard in the worst possible way, and for just a moment, just a flash, everything she has been holding together comes very close to the surface. The man looks at the little girl, and something changes in his expression. Not pity. Not that uncomfortable look people get when they realize they've accidentally walked into someone else's grief. Something different. Something quieter. Like a door inside him opened just a crack. He looks at the little girl for a long moment, and then he very slowly crouches down to her level, and he says, "He sounds like he was a pretty tall guy." She nods very seriously. She says he was the tallest. She says he could reach anything. The man nods like this is very important information, like he is filing it away carefully. He says, "Well then, if there's ever anything else up high you need, I hope you find someone tall enough to help." He stands. He looks at the mother, just briefly. He doesn't say he's sorry for her loss. He doesn't say anything. He just nods once with his eyes, and then he turns and walks the end of the aisle and disappears around the corner. The mother stands there holding her daughter's hand and the can of peaches and all $41 of her budget and 7 months of grief, and she does not cry. She will not cry in this store. She has a rule about that. But she presses her lips together and she looks down at her daughter and she says, "Why peaches of all things?" And her daughter says, "Because Daddy always said peaches were the best fruit, and we haven't had them in a long time." She was getting them for him. Even now, even still, her name is Diane. She is 38 years old and she looks, on a good day, like a woman who used to laugh more. She grew up in a mid-sized town in Ohio, married her high school sweetheart at 24, had her daughter at 33, and spent the years in between building the kind of quiet, solid, ordinary life that people drive past and never think about twice. A small house, a used car, a garden in the backyard that she kept meaning to expand, a husband who was 6 feet 4 inches tall and who could reach the top shelf of any cabinet, and who called her every day on his lunch break just to hear her voice. Not to say anything important, just to hear her voice. He died 7 months ago. Not dramatically, not in a way that makes the news or gets a foundation named after it. He died of a heart attack at 41 years old on a Wednesday morning before breakfast. He was here, and then he was not here, and nothing in the world prepared her for how permanent that would be. How completely and utterly the absence of one person could reshape every single inch of your life. She went back to work 3 weeks after the funeral, because she had to, not because she was ready, because the mortgage doesn't pause for grief, because her daughter still needed lunch packed and dentist appointments and someone to read to her at night, because life, unlike her husband, did not stop. It kept moving forward at the same pace it always had, and she had no choice but to move with it, carrying everything. She did not tell many people how bad it was. She is from the generation and the temperament that considers struggle to be a private matter. Her mother raised her to handle things. Her father raised her to not ask for help she didn't absolutely need. She had gotten very good at looking functional, at answering fine when people asked how she was doing, at smiling at the right moments and holding it together in public, and then sitting in her car in parking lots for 10 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. Her daughter, May, was 5 when her father died. She is almost 6 now. She is small for her age, with her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and a way of saying exactly what she thinks that stopped being cute the moment it started being heartbreaking. She talks about her father in present and past tense interchangeably, the way children do when they haven't fully made peace with a concept as enormous as forever. Sometimes she talks about him like he just stepped out. Sometimes she talks about him like she already understands, with gravity no child her age should carry, that he is not coming back. She keeps a photograph of him on the nightstand next to her bed. She says good night to it every night. Diane knows this because she stands in the hallway and listens. It is the thing that breaks her and holds her together at the same time. The man's name is Calvin Brooks. Most people call him Cal. Most people, when they hear that name, recognize it immediately. He is not famous in the way that actors and musicians are famous, but he is known in a way that certain kinds of wealth are known. He built his first company at 26 out of a rented office space with 2 employees and a credit card he was terrified of maxing out. He sold it at 31 for more money than he had ever seen in a number. He built 2 more after that. He sits on 4 boards. He has been on the cover of 2 business magazines in the last decade. He owns a house here in this ordinary mid-sized town because this is where he grew up, and he bought it back after his mother died because he needed somewhere to go that wasn't associated with who he had become. He drives himself to the grocery store. He doesn't need to. He could have things delivered. He could have an assistant do this. But he comes here himself sometimes when the house gets too quiet, which is often, and the silence starts to feel less like peace and more like punishment. He is not a man who talks about himself easily. He is not a man who lets people in without significant resistance. He has been described by journalists as private, by former employees as exacting, by the 3 women he dated seriously in his 40s as emotionally unavailable, which is a kind of language he doesn't love but probably can't argue with. What none of those articles and none of those descriptions ever captured was that he lost a daughter, a little girl he never got to meet, born too early, too small, too fragile. 11 years ago, he and the woman he was with at the time came apart in the aftermath of that loss in the slow, painful way that people do when they are both grieving and don't know how to help each other do it. He doesn't talk about it. He thinks about it more than he talks about it by a factor that would alarm most people who know him. He went to the grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon because he needed coffee, and he wasn't ready to go back to that quiet house yet. And a little girl walked up to him in the canned goods aisle and asked him to reach something from the top shelf. And he did. And she said 7 words to him that went straight through his chest like a key into a lock he didn't know was still there. "You're the same height as my daddy was." He drove home. He sat in the driveway for longer than he intended. He went inside and he made coffee. He didn't drink. He stood at the window looking at the backyard of the house he grew up in, the yard where he used to play as a kid, and he thought about a 5-year-old girl getting peaches for a man who wasn't there anymore to eat them. And something in him, something that had been sealed off and locked down and filed away, cracked open just slightly. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her mother's name. He had no reason to believe he would ever see either of them again. He was wrong about that. The following Saturday, Diane takes May to the farmer's market 2 blocks from the grocery store. It is the kind of outing that looks like a treat, but is actually very carefully budgeted. She lets May pick 2 things. That is the rule. 2 things. Whatever she wants within reason, and they look at everything else for free. May takes this responsibility very seriously. She deliberates over every table like she is making a decision that will affect the outcome of civilization. Diane is standing near a table of honey jars, not buying, just looking, when May grabs her hand and pulls. Hard, the way she does when she is very excited or very certain about something. Diane looks up, across the narrow market lane, standing at a produced table with no assistant, no entourage, no indication that he is anything other than a regular person at a regular Saturday market, is the man from the grocery store. Cal, he hasn't seen them yet. He is talking to the woman at the table, asking about something the way people do when they genuinely want to know the answer. He is not performing. He is not on. He is just a man at a market on a Saturday morning, and Diane would not have recognized him at all except for the height and the gray at the temples, and the way May is pulling her arm out of its socket, trying to get to him. Diane grabs her, gently, firmly. She tells her no. She tells her we don't bother strangers twice. She uses the voice that means this is not a negotiation. May looks up at her with her father's eyes and says, "But he was nice." Diane says, "Yes, he was, and we are not going to bother him again." May says, "I want to give him something." Diane says, "We don't have anything to give." May reaches into the small cloth bag she carries everywhere, and she pulls out one of the peaches. They bought 4 at the grocery store that day, 1 for each of them for 4 days. May has been eating them slowly, savoring them, the way her father taught her to eat things you really love. She has 1 left, and she has apparently decided, entirely on her own, without consulting anyone, that this last peach belongs to the tall man from the canned goods aisle. Diane looks at the peach. She looks at her daughter. She wants to say no. She has 6 very good reasons to say no. But her daughter is looking at her with a steadiness that belongs on someone 30 years older, and she cannot find the words. She takes a breath. She says, "Okay, but we are not going to bother him. We're going to walk past, and if he sees us, we stop. If he doesn't, we keep walking. Do you understand?" May nods gravely. They walk across the lane. He sees them when they are about 10 feet away. There is a half-second where his face does something fast, something Diane can't fully read, and then it settles into that same quiet expression he had in the grocery store, like he's not surprised, like some part of him was not entirely shocked to see them again. May walks directly up to him, extends the peach with both hands, and says, "This is for you, because you helped me." He looks at the peach. He looks at May. He crouches down to her level again, and Diane notices that he does this naturally, without thinking, the way tall people do when they've spent years being deliberate about not towering over smaller people. He says, "I can't take your peach." May says, "Yes, you can. It's mine to give." He says, "You should eat it." May says, "I want to save it. Now I want you to have it." She pauses. She says, "My daddy said you should always give your best thing to someone who deserves it." The market noise continues all around them. A vendor calls out to a passing customer. A dog barks 2 tables down. The world keeps going. Cal takes the peach. He holds it in both hands for a moment like it is something rare. And then he looks up at Diane, and she is not ready for what she sees in his face. There is no pity there. There is something else. Something that looks, from the outside, like recognition. Like he knows something about loss that qualifies him to be standing in this specific moment. He says to Diane, "She's remarkable." Diane says, "I know. She makes it very difficult sometimes." He almost smiles. She almost smiles back. He tells him his name. She tells him hers. May says she already knew his name was something good. She can tell by faces. He says he's never heard that before. May says she made it up. She does that. He texts his lawyer that evening for the first time in weeks about non-business matters. He texts him to ask if there is anything going on in town he might not know about. His lawyer, who has known him for 20 years and understands this is not really about events listings, writes back and says, "You met someone." Cal stares at the message for a long time. He writes back, "I met a 5-year-old who gave me a peach." His lawyer sends back, "That's either the beginning of something or the strangest Tuesday you've had in years." Cal doesn't respond. He puts the peach on the kitchen counter. He doesn't eat it that night. He doesn't know why. He just looks at it when he walks through the kitchen, and that is enough. Diane doesn't tell anyone about the man at the market. There's no one to tell, really. Her closest friend moved to Portland 2 years ago, and they talk by phone on Sunday evenings when the time difference allows. Her sister-in-law, her husband's sister, has been kind but fragile in her own grief, and their calls lately feel like two people carefully avoiding the thing they both need to talk about most. Her mother is in Florida. Her co-workers are friendly, but not close. She goes to bed that Saturday night and stares at the ceiling and thinks about the way he held the peach like it was something delicate, like he understood exactly what it was and what it cost to give it away. She tells herself it was a nice moment. That's all. A nice moment at a market with a stranger who happened to be kind. Those exist. They are allowed to exist without meaning anything larger. She turns over and looks at the photograph on May's nightstand to the open door between their rooms. The photograph she can see in the dim light from the street lamp outside. The photograph of a man who was 6 feet 4 inches tall, and who reached the top shelves, and who said you should give your best thing to someone who deserves it. And she thinks, okay. She breathes. She closes her eyes. It takes a long time to fall asleep. Monday morning, she drops May at school and goes to her job at the records office of the county courthouse, where she has worked for 11 years, where she knows every file and every system and every person, and where she has a specific kind of invisible competence that holds a building together without anyone fully realizing it. She is good at her job in a way that grieving people sometimes become very good at their jobs, because it is the one place where she knows exactly what she is supposed to do. She is at her desk by 8:15. By 8:40, she has already fixed a database error that 2 of her colleagues have been working around for a week. By 9, she has coffee and a stack of files, and a Monday that looks exactly like every other Monday. Her supervisor, a kind woman in her late 50s who has never asked too many questions and who always leaves a granola bar on Diane's desk on the hard days because she understands hard days without needing to be told, stops by and asks how the weekend was. "Fine," Diane says. "Good, actually." Her supervisor looks at her for a moment. She says, "You look like someone who slept a little." Diane says she did, actually. Her supervisor nods, satisfied, and walks away. "Fine. Good, actually." She said that. She meant it. That is something. 3 weeks pass. She does not see Cal again during those 3 weeks. Life continues at its regular pace. There are school pickups and dinner preparations and bedtimes and bills and Saturday mornings when she sits at the kitchen table with her coffee and her husband's absence and tries to make the math of her life add up to enough. It usually does, just barely. Barely counts. May does not forget the man from the grocery store. May does not forget anything. She mentions him occasionally, matter-of-factly, the way she mentions things that she has filed under important. She says once at dinner that she hopes he liked the peach. She says once at bedtime that she thinks he was lonely. When Diane asks why she thinks that, May thinks about it very seriously and says, "Because he looked at me the same way I look at Daddy's picture." Diane puts May to bed that night and then stands in the hallway outside her door for a very long time. It is the first genuinely warm Saturday of the year, the kind that makes the whole town feel like it exhaled. Diane takes May to the park, not the small one near their house, the bigger one on the east side with the walking trail that goes around the pond. Her husband used to run that trail on Sunday mornings. She has not been there since he died. She is going today because she is tired of avoiding things. Because her friend on the phone last Sunday said you have to start walking back into the places you've been hiding from gently, but you have to start because it is warm and her daughter deserves a real Saturday. They walk the trail. May finds 3 interesting rocks and a feather and explains at length why each of them is significant. Diane listens. She is very good at listening to May. It is one of the things she does best now, being fully present for this child who is navigating loss with more grace than anyone should have to. They are halfway around the pond when May stops walking. He is on the other side of the trail, coming toward them, running shoes, a gray t-shirt. He has a slightly stunned look of someone who has just been surprised by something, which is exactly what he is, because he did not expect to see them here on this trail on this particular Saturday, and yet here they all are. The three of them stop in the middle of the trail. May waves like she is signaling a ship. He stops running. He waves back. He crosses the trail to them. He says, of all the parks in all the towns. Diane says, do you run here often? He says he used to. He stopped for a while. He came back today for the first time in about a year. She says, us too. First time back in a while. They stand there for a moment. The pond is very still. The light is doing that afternoon thing where everything looks slightly golden and slightly unreal. May is already telling him about the feathers she found and explaining her theory about which kind of bird it came from. He listens to her with his whole attention, not the polite half-listening of adults who are really just waiting for children to stop talking. He actually listens. He asks a follow-up question about the bird theory. May's eyes light up. Diane watches this and feels something shift in her chest. Something she does not have a name for yet. Something she is not sure she's ready to name. He walks with them for the rest of the trail. Just falls into step beside them like it is the most natural thing in the world. May is in between them, holding Diane's hand and swinging it, explaining things. The light gets more golden. The path curves around the far end of the pond where the willow trees are. It is an ordinary Saturday afternoon in an ordinary park. Nothing is happening except two adults walking beside each other and a little girl between them who seems, in her 5, almost 6-year-old way, perfectly content. When they reach the end of the trail, May announces that she needs a bathroom, which means Diane needs to take her, which means Diane needs to go now, which means this is the end of the walk. Cal says it was good to see them again. Diane says yes, it was. They look at each other for 1 second longer than necessary. He says, I know this is completely out of nowhere, and I am aware that we have met 3 times by accident, which is a strange basis for anything. But if you ever want to bring May for a walk sometime, I would like that. Diane says, you're asking to walk around a pond with a 5-year-old and her mother. He says, I am. She says, that is a very specific request. He says, she gave me her last peach. I think I owe her at least a walk. Diane looks at him for a moment. She says, okay. She gives him her number. He gives her his. May is already pulling her toward the bathroom, and she lets herself be pulled, but she glances back once, just once, and he is still standing there, and he lifts a hand. She turns back around. She is smiling, just slightly, just barely, but it is real. What follows is not a romance. Exactly, not at first. It is slower than that, and more careful than that, and more complicated than that. They walk around the pond the following Saturday, the 3 of them, and May finds 2 more rocks and a piece of what she is convinced is quartz. He listens to the quartz theory with the same complete attention he gave the bird feather theory. Diane walks beside him, and they talk about simple things. The town, the weather, not as an event, but just as something happening. Her job, briefly. He doesn't bring up his. She already knows who he is by now. She looked him up the same night she gave him her number, the way anyone would. And she found all the articles and all the numbers, and she sat with that information for a while. When she tells him that she knows who he is, about 20 minutes into the second walk, he goes quiet for a moment, not defensive, just still, like he's waiting to see what comes next. She says she's not going to make a big thing of it. She just wanted him to know that she knows, so they're not pretending. He says, does it change anything for you? She thinks about it honestly. She says, I don't know yet. Ask me later. He says, okay, that's fair. They keep walking. He meets May's high standards 3 weeks into their Saturday walks when he correctly identifies the song she is humming as a song her father used to sing to her, not because he knows the song, but because when she tells him what it is, he says he'll learn it. And the following Saturday, he has actually looked it up, and he can hum along badly. And May decides this is the funniest thing that has ever happened and laughs until her face is red. Diane watches her daughter laugh, really laugh, the full-body laugh she hasn't heard in months. And she has to look away for a second, toward the pond. toward the trees, toward anything that is not her child's face full of light. He notices. He doesn't say anything, but he notices. The first complication arrives on a Thursday. Diane is at her desk when she gets a call from a number she doesn't recognize, different from the one that called her in the grocery store those weeks ago. And when she answers, it is a woman who identifies herself as a journalist from a business publication that Diane has heard of. The journalist says she is working on a profile of Calvin Brooks, and she understands he has been spending some time locally. She asks if Diane has had any contact with him. Diane says no comment and hangs up. She sits at her desk for a moment. Then she texts him. He calls back in under a minute. She tells him what happened. He is quiet for a second, and then he says, "I'm sorry. I want you to know that I didn't know she was looking into this. I'll handle it." She says, "How'd they find out?" He says, "People watch. People talk. I should have thought about this more carefully." There's a long pause. She says, "What exactly were you supposed to think about carefully?" He says, "That the things I do affect other people now, and I need to be more careful about that." She lets that sit for a moment. She says, "Is this going to be a thing?" He says, "It doesn't have to be." She says, "That's not what I asked." He says, "Yes, with me, this is always going to be a thing to some degree. I wish it wasn't, but I'm not going to lie to you about it." She says she needs to think. He says, "Take all the time she needs." She says, "Okay." She sits at her desk. She thinks about a journalist on the phone. She thinks about a man who drives himself to the grocery store because his house is too quiet. She thinks about her daughter laughing at a badly hummed song. She thinks about a peach held in two hands like something rare. She texts him that evening. "Saturday is still on if you want." He writes back, "I want." The second complication is harder. Her mother-in-law calls on a Sunday. Her husband's mother, a woman she loves and who loves her. And somehow the topic turns, in that careful circling way that difficult topics approach, to the fact that Diane has been seen around town with a man. Not accusingly. Her mother-in-law is not that kind of woman. But there is something in her voice, something fragile and frightened. And she says, "I just want to make sure you're okay. I just want to make sure you're not forgetting." Diane grips the phone. She says, very quietly, "I'm never going to forget." Her mother-in-law says, I know, I just miss him." She saw a video at school about planting things in memory of people you love, and she has decided she wants to plant something for her daddy on her birthday, so that every year when it comes back, he does too. Diane holds it together when May tells her this. She holds it together very well. She tells Cal about it on their next walk. He says nothing for a while, just walks. Then he says, "What kind of tree?" She says she doesn't know. She hasn't figured that part out yet. He says, "I know a good nursery. If you want help choosing, I'll come. If you don't want help, I'll just tell you what to look for." She says she'll think about it. She thinks about it. The night before May's birthday, she is up late, as she often is, in the kitchen with the lights low and a cup of tea that has gone cold. And she is looking at a photograph she keeps in the drawer by the stove. Not on the counter, not on the wall, in the drawer. Because she needs it to be somewhere she can choose to look at it, not somewhere it looks at her. It is a photograph of the two of them, her and her husband, taken on a Saturday morning years before May was born. They are at a farmer's market. He is holding something. She cannot remember what. But he is laughing, and she is looking at him laughing, and they are both golden in that afternoon light. And they had absolutely no idea, on that particular Saturday, what was coming. She looks at the photograph for a long time. Then she puts it back in the drawer. She picks up her phone. She writes a text to Cal. She wants the peach tree. May. She wants to plant a peach tree for her dad. He writes back after a minute. That's perfect. She writes, "Will you come?" He writes, "I'll be there." She puts down the phone. She drinks her cold tea. She looks at the drawer for one more moment. Then she gets up, turns off the kitchen light, and goes to bed. She sleeps, not long, but deep, and that is something. May's birthday is a Saturday. There are 5 children, and a chocolate and vanilla cake, and a backyard that Diane spent 2 evenings cleaning up, and a small peach tree from a nursery that is about 3 feet tall and wrapped at the base with burlap, and sitting in the corner of the yard waiting. Cal arrives after the party, after the cake and the candles and the goodbyes, when it is just the 3 of them in the afternoon and the small tree. He brings gardening gloves in 3 sizes. He brings a book about peach trees that he found that is old, that has hand-drawn illustrations, and he gives it to May as a birthday present. She opens it and turns every page slowly, studying each drawing, and she says it is the best present she has ever received. He says he's glad. She says she means it. He says he knows she does. They plant the tree together, all three of them, kneeling in the dirt of the backyard, following the instructions he found and printed, making the hole the right depth and adding the right soil, and setting the roots in carefully and covering it back up. May takes each step very seriously. She asks questions the whole time. He answers every one. When it's done, May stands up and looks at the tree. She is quiet for a long moment, which is unusual for her. Then she says, "Hi, Daddy." Diane puts her arm around her daughter. She does not say anything. There is nothing to say. There are just the three of them in a backyard on a Saturday in May, standing around a small peach tree with dirty hands. And the afternoon light is very golden, and somewhere in the branches of that little tree, if you believe in such things, there is something that was reached for and found. Cal stands slightly apart from them, at the right distance, not intruding, just there, present, the way a person is present who understands that some moments belong to others, and that the best thing you can do is simply stay. May looks up at him. She says, "Do you think it'll grow big?" He says, "With the right care, peach trees can live for a very long time." May says, "Good." She says it very simply. "Good," like a period at the end of a sentence that needed one. She walks back to the house to wash her hands and to look at her book. The screen door swings shut behind her. Diane is still looking at the tree. She says, without turning around, "Thank you." He says, "Thank you for letting me be here." She turns around. They are standing in a backyard full of afternoon light and the small evidence of something growing, and she says, "I don't know what I'm doing." He says, "Neither do I." She says, "That should be scarier than it is." He says, "Maybe, or maybe that means we're doing it right." She looks at him for a long moment. The man who reached something from a top shelf. The man who crouched down to hear a 5-year-old. The man who held a peach like it was rare. She nods. Just once. And that is enough. 3 days later, Diane gets a phone call. It is not a journalist this time. It is a lawyer. Not Cal's lawyer. Someone else's lawyer. Someone who represents, the voice says carefully and precisely, a member of Calvin Brooks' family. Someone who has become aware of the relationship and has concerns. Diane stands in the kitchen, holding her phone. She says, "What kind of concerns?" The lawyer says, "The kind that are better discussed in person." The lawyer says there is someone who would very much like to meet with her. Privately. Diane says, "Why would I agree to that?" The lawyer says, "Because what this person has to tell her involves Calvin Brooks, and it is something she deserves to know before she goes any further." The kitchen is very quiet. She says, "Who is this person?" The lawyer says a name. Diane sits down at the kitchen table. She says, "And you're saying he doesn't know about this call?" The lawyer says, "No, he does not." She sits at that table for a long time after the call ends. The tea she made is cold again. May is in the next room. The little peach tree is in the backyard, small and new and rooted now. She looks at her phone. She looks at his name in her contacts. She thinks about what the lawyer said. The name, the implication, the thing she is being told she doesn't know. She thinks about a man who drove himself to the grocery store because his house was too quiet. She thinks about honesty, about a peach held in 2 hands, about a daughter who reads faces, about the height of good men. She picks up the phone. She calls him. He answers on the second ring. She says she needs to talk to him. He hears something in her voice and says, "What's wrong?" She says, "I just got a very strange phone call." There's a pause, and then he says, "Tell me." She says, "Someone says there's something about you I should know." There's a pause that is longer than the first one. He says her name. She says, "Is there something you haven't told me?" And the pause after that is the longest one of all. And that is where the day ends, in a kitchen with a phone pressed to an ear, waiting. Because here's the thing about real love. Not the kind they write songs about. The real kind. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive when you're ready for it. It doesn't ask your permission or check your calendar or wait until the grief has finished and the house is quiet and the timing is right. It walks up to you in a grocery store when everything is going wrong and asks you to reach something from a high shelf. And it is small, and it is simple, and it is entirely unexpected, and it changes everything anyway. A little girl knew. She walked right up to the height of him, and she put the last peach in the world into his hands. And she said, "This is for you, because you helped me." And something that was locked unlocked, and something that was sealed cracked open, and something that was planted in a backyard on a Saturday in May is growing now in the dark, doing the quiet work that growing things do, putting down roots, reaching toward light. That is not the end of the story, but it is maybe the beginning of one. If this story moved you today, if it reminded you that sometimes the most extraordinary moments happen in the most ordinary places, please subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who is going through a hard season and needs to be reminded that something unexpected and good can still find them. Drop a comment below. Tell me who in your life showed up at exactly the right moment. Tell me if you've ever given your last peach to someone who deserved it. Your comments mean more than you know, and they help this channel reach people who need to hear these stories. The next chapter of the story is coming, and I promise you, what that lawyer knows will change everything. Stay with me.